very good morning to you. We're live from London and you're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. In a moment, we'll be crossing live to Dubai for the latest from our correspondent in the Gulf as a second day of attacks on Iran begins and Tehran retaliates right across the region. We'll also have reaction from our editorial director, Brûlé in Lisbon, and my guests, Yossi Mekelberg and Tira Shubart, will share their views on the week's biggest stories and indeed the reaction to what's happened in the last 24 hours. Yossi, good morning.
Well, the big news of the last 24 hours is the coordinating airstrikes by Israel and the United States on Iran, which I think is one of the most consequential moments in recent history of the region.
OK, thank you very much indeed for that. We will also be covering some other stories. We'll be getting the latest from Oslo.
I'm Lars Bevanger, Monocle's Oslo correspondent, and today I'll talk more about the epic Epstein fallout in Norway, snap elections in Denmark, and how to catch cheating skiers.
It's the 1st of March 2026, live from London. This is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
And a very good morning to you. In a moment, I will be bringing in our guests. Tira Shubart, Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and Ambassador for the Science Museum here in London. Good morning, Tira.
Morning.
And Yossi Mekelberg, Senior Consulting Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. A very good morning to you both.
Good morning.
We will come to you in a moment for your reaction and your analysis over what's been happening in the last 48 hours. But first, let's go straight to Dubai. We have Monocle's Gulf correspondent Inzamam Rashid on the line in Dubai. And also we have our editorial director, Brûlé, standing by from Lisbon. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, Emma.
Indy, can I start with you? Just bring us up to date with the events in the last, let's say, 12 hours of the last 24. We have confirmation now from Iran that its supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has been killed. We have the commander of the Revolutionary Guards killed and also the head of the National Defense Council also killed in these strikes that the US and the Israelis coordinated yesterday.
Yeah, so look, it's been a very busy, fast-moving 24 hours here in the region, especially after Israel and US coordinated those strikes on Iran yesterday, and the retaliation to the US and to Israel has come thick and fast. Firstly, Iran firing missiles and drones into Israel, into Tel Aviv, other parts of Israel as well, causing damage in some instance, some deaths in some instances as well across Israel. But then a barrage of attacks in the Gulf, right across the GCC. Yesterday, we saw 6 nations of the 7 attacked. Oman was the only nation that wasn't targeted by Israel. Of course, Oman being the country that brokered the negotiations between the US and Iran in Geneva. But of course, those talks didn't go successfully. And so as a result, the strikes went ahead. So Oman were exempt yesterday, but that's turned around today. Oman also being struck here in the Gulf. Yesterday, we saw rockets flying into US air bases up and down the Gulf, a number of them, particularly here in Abu Dhabi, just down the road from where I am. Over in Bahrain, the Al Jureir air base, which is near to residents, near to civilians. Qatar saw a huge number of missile and drone attacks towards the Al Udeid air base, the largest US military base in the region. Riyadh, Jordan as well. So there was no safe place in the Gulf yesterday as Iran carried out its attack on all those nations and trying to target US air bases. But what we also found yesterday, Emma, is that beyond targeting US air bases and US bases in general in the Gulf, Iran were targeting big infrastructure models like airports here in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. In Abu Dhabi, we saw a drone being flown towards Abu Dhabi International Airport that was intercepted by the UAE defense interceptors, and as a result, there was debris that fell down onto the airport, killing one man, injuring 7 others. We saw a similar event happen at the world's busiest airport here in Dubai. 4 members of staff injured from debris falling down on the airport as Iran tried to target that facility. And then we've seen hotels, the Fairmont Hotel here on the Palm Jumeirah, a 5-star hotel packed with tourists from all over the world. Debris flying down and a huge explosion which caused windows around the building to shatter, which caused huge anxiety disruption on the Palm Jumeirah. And then in front of where I live, about a kilometre in the distance or so, we've seen the Jebel Ali port. That is a port where US Navy vessels have been sitting, laying in wait to be deployed if they need to be, as they built up over the last few weeks. And Iran strategically targeted the Jebel Ali port. Some missiles managed to get through, some intercepted by the defense system. And all night I've seen smoke and fire coming up from the Jebel Ali port. And clearly there has been significant disruption and destruction there as well. So look, it's been a busy 24 hours. Iran has retaliated, I think, perhaps like the UAE and other Gulf nations thought that they may not, particularly targeting a place like Dubai, a place which is often proud itself in being safe, secure, stable. And yet here we are waking up this morning and into this afternoon seeing plumes of smoke all around this city where people are now quite worried to be living and staying in.
Tyler, let's bring you in on this one, because if you look this morning at flight radar, you can see the airspace over the Gulf emptying. We have the National reporting that Dubai is suspending all flights as Gulf states are closing airspace. We also have the Peninsula coming out of Qatar saying temporary suspension of Qatar Airways flights due to Qatar airspace closure. It is an astonishing state of events, isn't it, that Iran may not have the huge firepower to directly take on Israel and the United States, but it can mess things up really quickly.
Yeah, this is where it becomes really global impact, because you have to think, well, I'm standing in Lisbon. I was with INZI sort of only 72 hours ago in Dubai, 96 hours ago in Dubai. This is a time of morning here in Lisbon, not very far from the airport, where you would see Etihad, Emirates, Qatar coming in at this time of morning, of course, and this story is being played out at scores and scores of airports all over the world, that here you have 3 global carriers that have really built their names over the last, in some cases, you could say they became household names over the last 15 years, certainly over the last 2 decades. And the power of these Gulf brands is significant, not just in terms of name recognition, but of course, Emirates is the world's largest international long-haul carrier. But the whole region has built itself to some extent, of course, if it's not just on, petrol, it is certainly on global connectivity, and of course connectivity being the foundation of global trade. And here you have 3 carriers which are where their aircraft are grounded, and of course from Kuwait all the way down to Oman, that entire region is completely closed. And what we of course have seen during flare-ups in the region, these carriers, and as INZI was saying a little bit earlier, there's all of the Gulf states, the GCC, have been very, very good at, of course, being very delicate players in the background diplomatically, and diplomacy does play a big role when it comes to whether it is the flow of traffic across oceans, or certainly the flow of traffic in the skies. And you've always seen the Gulf carriers somehow carve out channels for their aircraft, flight paths for their aircraft to get around the conflicts in the region, because it's absolutely essential for their business. That is not the case now. So the impact, Emma, that that these airports, while not shuttered, they're not getting aircraft neither into the sky or landing them. And then you have to think about the knock-on impact. What does this mean now? You of course have hundreds and hundreds of aircraft which are out of sync around the world. You have passengers, of course, who will not be boarding, who do not want to be heading through the region, even if they're not staying. Of course, much of the traffic is about connectivity. So I think that this is going to be, let's see how long-lasting it is. Some people, of course, will always vote on price, and whatever carrier comes up, they're happy to fly with them. There are going to be many other passengers and travelers as well who are not going to want to fly through the region. And then I think we haven't even addressed the issue as, looking at, of course, very high-profile targets. You could argue, did these strikes in front of the Burj Al Arab, in front of the Fairmont, were these drones or intercepts that went astray, or was it deliberate? And these were, of course, hits that we're talking about now. And listen, Dubai and many parts of the UAE made a huge name for themselves as places not just to have a convenient set of meetings, but also as places which are well connected for, if you want, 5 days, 10 days of sunshine.
Indeed. I mean, Lindsay, let's bring you back on this one. That as Tyler says, this is the place where people go to for, well, two things. One, to use it as a hub, a hop over if you're trying to go over to Asia, if you're going down to Australia. Basically, this part of the world is the middle of the wheel from which all the spokes fly out. But to have tourists wandering around Dubai yesterday, but to see part of the Burj Al Arab being attacked, that sends an incredibly powerful and very powerful message just about the region's fragility today.
Well, look, this is the UAE's worst nightmare because, as you've said, it prides itself on safety, on stability, on security. That's why so many expats move out here. It's why so many foreigners decide to shift their lives, bring their families here. And it's why so many people like to come on holiday. Of course, the sunshine, the beaches, but notably the roads are a lot quieter today. The beaches and the beach clubs are a lot quieter today, as they were yesterday as well. So it is having a huge impact. People who've come here on holiday, who probably now want to go back home, can't because the airspace is closed. They can't get a flight out of here. Emma, also, what I found was pretty interesting is many people who were trying to leave Dubai, maybe people who live here and were going across the border into Oman, thinking that, well, Oman's not been attacked and it's a pretty safe place to be. Well, now that has changed. This morning and into the afternoon, Oman has also now seen a barrage of missiles and strikes from Iran. So look, no space in the Gulf is safe at the minute. I think it's pretty fair to say that, because wherever you may be, even if you're not near a US military base, the debris which is falling from missiles and drones which are being intercepted can pretty much land absolutely anywhere. So it's a worrying time for not just the residents of the UAE, but people visiting here, and also the government, who will not want this messaging, who will not want the idea that now the UAE is an unsafe and unstable place. What I have to say is that the UAE has done well in terms of intercepting a lot of these ballistic missiles from Iran. They launched 137 ballistic missiles yesterday, 209 drones towards the UAE, and the UAE intercepted most of them. Only around 14 of them got through and caused damage. It's the same around the rest of the Gulf as well, but that's not, one is too many for the UAE, and I think they'll be very worried about the impact that this will have long term. They'll just want things to get back to normal as soon as possible. Right now, I mean, even as there have been bangs going on behind me this afternoon as well, it feels like normality is pretty far off.
Let me bring you in now, Yossi Mekelberg, sitting around the table here in London. We're also seeing the Strait of Hormuz being very, very profoundly affected. Now, this is where major oil carriers go through, trading houses, crude oil, fuel, liquefied natural gas shipments, so much goes through the Strait of Hormuz. That is now stopping. And so how long is it until the rest of the world suddenly feels this?
So I think the first point I would like to make is just demonstrate that stability in the Middle East is a very thin veneer. And because we don't deal with the root causes of instability across the region, from the Levant to the Gulf and the rest. And trying to resolve it militarily, obviously, always backfires. Now, where it's all going, also what we see, the reaction by Iran, not only it's the nightmare of the rest of the Gulf, from an Iranian point of view, it's almost saying if they're resorting to this is the kind of the doomsday scenario. It's only when they feel that they're under existential threat, they will attack countries that they actually, in normal days, they need them. We forget that there are tens and thousands of Iranians working in the Gulf, that they are attacking them too. So we feel that and it's always been in Iran about regime survival, and they are fighting a rearguard battle right now, which of course we know with the death of Khamenei, at least in this case, it was lost for him. From what I hear, the expectation is can last anything between 5 and 2 weeks. But this is kind of best case scenarios, because the way that the Americans and the Israelis work is they have the operation underway. They got the intelligence correct. The first strike was successful by any standards. Then the question whether they assessed the damage that the Iranians, the retaliation from Iran, not only, but, one is in the Gulf, whether, on Israel, there is a barrage of missiles this morning on Israel. Their defense system work, but even then they are limited because much of it was spent 6-8 months ago. And we also have to remember, by the end of the war in June, Netanyahu said we brought peace and quiet, or at least quiet and calm, for generations. 8 months later, we are here.
And this is the fear, Tyler, isn't it, now about, excuse me, and this is the fear, Tyler, isn't it, that we have what Yossi was saying, 5 days to 2 weeks operation. That is perhaps something that the Gulf could handle. But as we all know, these things tend to last.
For sure. And of course, there is the bigger issue, which I'm sure over the next, at least 30 minutes, we'll be talking about, of course, the other issue, which, comes up, at every third story in every feed around the world right now, which is the topic of regime change as well. But we'll come back to that. But I think, what this does, and we come back to, is it a small win or a significant win? But I think first, as Yossi's saying, it is significant that there was, direct attacks up and down the entire Gulf by Iran, and till now these states have all been sidestepped, and the attacks have been firmly directed. We have seen some direction at U.S. infrastructure before, but never really the direct or collateral damage that we've seen in the UAE, in Qatar, or indeed attacks going as far down as Oman today. Now, how quickly are, of course, the missiles and the drones depleted? Because there is an issue that they're going to run out of supply, of course, in Iran. We also have to remember as well, there's only so many interceptors as well. We have a world right now which, of course, is trying to rearm as quickly as possible. And, there are various, of course, defensive systems out there. But you just have to look at the order books. The order books really sort of started to step up, I would say, over the last 24 months. So you have a lot of countries that are still operating with supplies for a very different time. Now, that's not just in the Gulf, that is also globally as well. So there is this question, of course. We know that, certainly Iran's, arsenal is not what it was 36 months ago. Nevertheless, I'm sure that they have been working around the clock, of course, since the Israeli strikes earlier in the year. And intelligence will have a good idea of how deep those stockpiles are. But then there is a question: how many interceptors does Qatar and the UAE and their allies have? That's going to be an issue, because suddenly, if there is somehow a pause in intercepts, and then a lot of drones, of course, and missiles get through from Iran, that's just going to completely change also the narrative. And what we have seen as well, of course, Qatar is saying, these countries do have the right to respond as well. I don't think we're there yet, but at the same time, if the U.S. and Israel are not able to, in a coordinated effort, take out as many launch facilities in Iran, it would not be surprising then that you would see that they would need the muscle of other GCC nations to support them at that point.
Let's bring you in now, Tira. Tyler a moment ago mentioned the issue of succession. We have pledges from the Iranian government that it will retaliate for the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Also, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps chief has gone. And it seems that quite a lot of Khamenei's relatives, including his son and indeed his daughter, may have been killed as well. An incredible demonstration of efficiency and sharing of intelligence by the US and Israel. But when this happens, I mean, you've reported from inside Iran for decades. What are your thoughts about what is being contemplated right now?
Well, the succession is going to be the thing that is going to stay with us because, as Yossi said, the operation will be 5 days to a couple of weeks. But what is going to happen after that? Well, in normal times, the Assembly of Experts, this council of 88 people, would meet and they would make a choice on a single leader, or they can even do a temporary leadership council. But these are not normal times. I don't think you're going to get the Assembly of Experts together for some time. So who is the most powerful de facto group right now? I think it's the Revolutionary Guards. Despite the fact they've lost their commander, they are really consolidated for a number of reasons. They control a big chunk of the economy. Of course, they control the security apparatus. They have a very efficient intelligence network, and they also have their own media network. So they are dug in, and they have a lot to lose, and they are the ones that are in pole position. There are different candidates that of clerics. There's a couple of clerics that could take over, both of them based in Qom. Qom is the religious center of Iran. But the Revolutionary Guards is going to have a very large say in what happens, and they have moved into a power vacuum, I think, very quickly.
Let's bring back in Inzi in Dubai. Just looking from the outside, you have states, countries which now feel themselves very under attack, seeing all the attacks that we've seen in the UAE, on Kuwait, on Bahrain, and indeed on Israel as well. Indy, what is the reaction from where you are, not just on the military shock, but the fact that balance of that there's a very, very sensitive balance of dialogue, but absolutely, no great alliances being formed. How does the rest of the region now look at what decisions Iran now faces in terms of its next leaders?
Well, this was going to be a huge test for the region, and specifically the GCC, right? The UAE and Saudi Arabia have had pretty dire diplomatic relationships over the last few months, and the GCC as a whole needs to be on the same page. And I think they have been over the last 24 hours. The leaders have joined on several phone calls, speaking to each other. Donald Trump has been speaking to the leaders of Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia as well, Bahrain in that as well, and Jordan. And so those kind of conversations are ongoing. But they will be deeply affected by what's happened over the last 24 hours. And I think they'll now start to mount pressure on the US to back down, to get Israel to back down on their attacks as well inside Iran, because they do not want to see the continuation of a missile fire, of drone fire into their countries, causing huge damage. If we just look at the amount of missiles and drones which were fired yesterday, 137 into the UAE and 209 drones into the UAE, 66 missiles into Qatar, 45 missiles and 9 drones into Bahrain. That basically means that Iran launched roughly as many missiles and drones in the UAE yesterday as it did Israel, across the Gulf, as it did Israel, which just gives you the real sense that actually, they just want to cause disruption, not solely inside Israel. They want to target the rest of the Gulf as well. They want to create this hysteria. They want to create an issue for the Gulf. I think the UAE in particular, why has that been targeted more so than any other Gulf country? It's probably because they've been so publicly supportive of Israel. And I think maybe the UAE are feeling that today and over the last 24 hours in particular. So look, I think the Gulf nations will want to work together. They'll want to try and put pressure on the US, on Israel to back down so that all these barrage of missiles can stop here in the Gulf. I think just on one point as well, picking up on what some of our guests have said, is that Iran's back is against the wall now after the death of the supreme leader, after the death of the head of the military, and also potential successors as well. It may feel like Iran has got nothing left to lose. And so we are just seeing a constant increase of missile and drone attacks across the Gulf. And I have no doubt that the fact that potentially nothing left to lose has got something to do with that.
Yossi, let's bring you on this idea that Iran is really has its back up against the wall. So it is up to whom to exert the pressure on Israel and the United States to back down? I mean, just watching the UN Security Council's emergency meeting yesterday, we had a long speech from the Iranian representative saying this was an unprovoked attack. Yet we had the Israelis straight away saying, no, we have been subject to endless provocation for years.
So, and they said something else as well, that it was a preemptive strike, but then you ask yourself, what preempted the strike? And they say, provoked is in the eye of the beholder. If you go all the way back to, for instance, as Trump did, when the so-called students took over the embassy in Tehran, so they already provoked back in 1979. But this is just part of the pretext to start this war. I also want to refer to something that Tyler mentioned. I think it's very important, because you have two sides that might run out of options, whether in terms of interceptors or in terms of launching missiles. Then actually they might take even a more extreme step just to try to finish off the war. And because we know definitely...
What do you mean by that?
Who knows? Depends what they have in their arsenal. You're talking about the United States in Israel. I don't expect to go all the way to nuclear, but they have enough ammunition, enough military power to make it, to try to inflict even more pain on Iran in order to finish it off, when they think if the Iranian can still launch missiles, can still hurt their allies across the Gulf and in Israel, and they're low when it comes to interceptor. This can, we work right now on almost a best case scenario that, it might end maximum within 2 weeks, regime change, and even, as both Netanyahu and Trump called the Iranian people, when it comes down a little bit, go to the streets, bring down the government, and we live happily ever after. But this is the best case scenario. There might be many other scenarios that are far from that, and then actually create, that both sides think, when we are getting to this doomsday scenario, that we need actually increase the pressure.
And Tyler, coming back to you, the fact that you'd spent the whole week out in that part of the world last week, and are people's plans and thoughts and even long-term strategies having to be reworked dynamically?
Well, it depends who we're talking about. Of course, Inzi speaks of, on one side of, the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that have moved out to the region, and whether those are people working in service who've moved from Mexico, who are working in restaurants, that are working from airlines, to management consultants that have moved their entire family from Copenhagen. That's one story, and then of course you have people from the region who've lived elsewhere in the world. Whether they're Qataris or Emiratis who've also returned. So I think there's a variety of stories in terms of what this will mean. What is the lasting impact? Does the UAE does life in Bahrain suddenly lose its sheen? Again, this comes down to how quickly this is resolved. It also comes back to, maybe this is a good one to bring Inzi on, which is how well have the communications been managed. I think this is another issue that, of course, these attacks came fast and furious. There was really, yes, there was a ratcheting up, but no one, I don't think anyone sort of woke up and of course saw that the attacks had happened. But of course, until now, we've seen that all of these places have been, immune from direct attacks. Of course, that changed over the last 24 hours. Now, is that going to create a situation where families are going to pull their kids out of school now and head back to where they came from, wait it out for the term? But the bigger issue will be, how well has Qatar, how well has the UAE managed civil defense? Because I think the point is that, any drone, any missile getting through, debris, the collateral damage of an intercept, none of it is great. Your country is under attack. And I think that this is, there will probably be some forgiveness if, yes, that the communications were effective, that people were able to, of course, take shelter in the right amount of time. If not, if that was not the case, and there's a question that's, of course, not just tourists, but also residents were caught out on the back foot, that becomes very different. Then it is much more complicated, I think, to, of course, correct that. And, of course, whether you're a tourist planning to go, whether you're a true local, or whether you're, of course, one of the hundreds of thousands of expats, you might think about things differently. And I mean, Inzi, I would like to know, of course, we were watching various correspondents and anchors on air yesterday. We heard their mobile phones going off. Alerts were obviously being sent to phones, but I'm wondering, how well have things been managed?
Indy, that question to you about the level of preparedness and the speed of response to the civil population.
Yeah, those alerts, I mean, they're quite alarming within themselves, and I think that's what they are supposed to be there for. But we saw that happen just around half an hour or so ago in Abu Dhabi once again. The government there advising people to take shelter, to bunker if they can. Look, there has been a lot of messaging from particularly the UAE government that I've seen, and also other GCC governments across the Gulf. These signals blaring out on people's phones. But also there has been an element of calm from the governments, asking people to remain calm, to remain indoors, to not, stockpile food. I've had messages from people saying that there have been queues of, 200 people at a Spinney supermarket in the Dubai marina trying to buy toilet roll and cleaning goods and fruit and vegetables. And the UAE government have actively said, there's no need for that. Just remain calm and remain indoors. So the messaging has been pretty clear. It's been pretty strong as well. I think one issue is that we face with any conflict nowadays is obviously the complete misinformation war as well. We've seen, a number of kind of false videos on social media, people spreading false information in WhatsApp groups. You've got a big kind of Pakistani Indian diaspora out here who usually get their news from these kind of WhatsApp groups, sending, false images and videos on Facebook. So the UAE government in particular have been very clear not to share any false information and to get news from the correct channels. I was out most of last night on my balcony reporting with the Jebel Ali port explosion behind me. And so, there is a real sense of this is the space, this is the place where the news is coming out from. People have been panicked on the ground, but the government is really pushing a real sense of calm throughout here, not only in the UAE, but across the Gulf as well.
Tira, let's bring you in.
Yeah, I would want to mention the Iranian people, and we've got to remember, we've got to have a spare thought for them. It's almost exactly 2 months to the day that they had the mass protests. Look what happened. We still don't know how many thousands of people were killed or are imprisoned. The Iranian people are being called upon by President Trump to rise up. Well, I mean, how are you going to do organized street protests? What is going to be the structure? Who are the leaders? There's Nargis Mohammadi, and she's in prison right now, the Nobel Peace Prize winner. Of course, there's the son of the former Shah, the late Shah, Reza Pahlavi, producing editorials in the Washington Post in America, or wherever it was that he wrote. But the Iranian people are caught in the middle here. Iran doesn't have the kind of interceptor technology that you have in the Gulf nations and in Israel. The Iranian people, we still don't know how many people are killed. They are the ones that are being called upon there to make a choice, and they're the ones that are absolutely stuck in the middle.
And we have very conflicting narratives coming out of Iran today in terms of what people are doing. You know, some are saying that there are celebrations on the street at the death of the supreme leader. Others are showing films of people mourning his death. And also we are in a place, Yossi, where the number of solid sound reporting correspondents out there is absolutely parlous. It's really difficult to get into Iran. It's really difficult to report from there.
Absolutely. And, when you're after 47 years or still, under this kind of regime, of course, there are those who are very happy to see Khamenei goes and they celebrated yesterday in the street. Those are mourned because this is the only regime they ever known in their life. The average age in Iran is between 32 and 33 years old. They don't know any difference in terms of being governed. And there was also the fear, what we are supposed to do, because if we go to the street and celebrate, it takes one car with a machine gun and kill dozens, if not hundreds of people. So there is still the fear and what the regime expects us when it happens in this kind of countries. And they also were locked down by the United States only a few weeks ago when President Trump said, help is on its way, and he didn't. This is the most disheartening for a revolution to happen when you think, the cavalry is behind you, but there is no one there, and you end with thousands and thousands of people killed, also still many of them in the morgues. Revolution usually need to emerge organically within the country, but at the same time the opposition is suppressed for all these years. So where it comes, Reza Pahlavi is not the answer. At best, you can be like what Juan Carlos was for Spain, is some of a uniting, symbolic personality that will take over for a short while. But it will take a time to change something like this. However, I think we are really, really early days there, and not so sure that the regime can't survive even this.
It's early days, and in 3 weeks, it's Nowruz, and Nowruz is a new year.
Absolutely.
Because Iran was first a Zoroastrian nation, and the Zoroastrian underneath Islam is a very important part of people's makeup. And Nowruz is a time of new beginnings, and let's hope that there's going to be some positive new beginnings.
Tyler, final word to you on this segment. The rest of the world, not just in the region, but globally, needs to think about how it reacts. I mean, we've seen the French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and the UK Prime Minister urging to seek a negotiated solution. The world's voices suddenly become very, very important at this point, but one wonders who will listen and whether they will have any effect.
Yeah, correct. And I think we know this, how open will the ears be in Washington, and I think there was a conversation there because, of course, you can go back, rewind 48 hours, and there was still a number of op-eds. There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal, which really talked about a lot of voices within the Pentagon, a lot of advisors saying that this is not the time and to pick this level of fight, even though, of course, we saw U.S. forces, of course, fully mobilized. Has this really been thought through? And that's what we're talking about, of course. Yes, that's, as we were just saying, that, a revolution needs to be grassroots. Of course, we've seen that there are some shoots around that within Iran, but we've also seen how that ended up over the past months. And so I think that, yes, we can convene a G7 conversation. If it isn't happening now, it will happen at some point today. But is that going to be a G6 conversation? Is Washington going to be on that call? Will the president be on that call? I wonder. I think that between Jerusalem and Washington, I think their minds are made up. They want to go for this. I think best best outcome is that this goes quickly, but then goes quickly. The big issue is then, of course, what comes next. And I think the big fear for the broader region is, an emptying out of the country, again, factionalization, what happens. And this, of course, lands on everybody else's doorstep. And I think these are the issues. There might be scenarios that have been planned for in Doha, in Kuwait City, in Manama. But again, this is the issue. Those places are very far from Washington, and how does Washington want to play a maintenance role afterwards?
Tyler Brûlé in Lisbon, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thanks also to our Gulf correspondent Inzamam Rashid, who's on the line from Dubai. And joining me in the studio today, Tira, Shubart, Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and Ambassador for the Science Museum here in London, and Yossi Mekelberg, Senior Consulting Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. The time here in London is 9:40 a.m. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Let's go back to slightly more normal service. Let's find out from a correspondent somewhere across the world what is going on in their patch. I'm delighted to say that this week it's the turn of Lars Bevanger, who's Monocle's Oslo correspondent. A very good morning to you, Lars.
Good morning, Emma.
Now, you want to the first story you want to talk about is the effect on basically on Norway of Iran, of what's the events that are happening in the Gulf.
Well, yeah, so the reactions across the Nordics have been not of condemnation of the attacks, but urging restraint, which is the usual response from countries in this part of the world. I think the only person to say that this is in breach of international law was the Norwegian Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide. The rest of the leaders around the Nordics have been calling for restraint and urging for diplomacy to return. But of course, as we've seen, that doesn't seem to be any chance of that happening anytime soon.
Indeed. And there is that thought, isn't there, that one wonders, as Tyler was just discussing a moment ago, concerted efforts, people pulling together, discussions being had. One wonders just how useful these will be today.
Absolutely. And another thing people in Norway in particular will be watching is, of course, what is happening to the oil and gas markets with the potential closing of the Strait of Hormuz. Norway, of course, being Europe's biggest gas exporter now to Europe because of sanctions on Russia. This will short-term probably have beneficial effects on the Norwegian economy, but long-term it's obviously bad for the global economy, which is a risk for everyone.
Okay, let's move on to another story, another chapter in the Jeffrey Epstein saga, the continued revelation of what happened with both the convicted paedophile businessman, but also the connections that he had globally. We saw the Clintons do their thing at the beginning of, or just at the end of the week. But the head of the World Economic Forum now has found the spotlight on him.
That's right. Børge Brende has now stepped down as leader of the World Economic Forum. People will remember him as interviewing Donald Trump on stage at the recent Davos summit. He's been a very clear leader of the forum for 8 years now, but it did emerge, well, he was confronted about his potential links to Epstein about a year ago when he told Norwegian media that he had never met him. He hardly knew who he was, he said. It emerged in the recent files released that he had actually met him on several occasions, had dinner with him, and they had been exchanging quite a few emails back and forth. So again, a senior Norwegian who has been caught out not telling the full truth, you could say lying to the media, and this is impacting Norwegians' trust in their leaders. We've had a former prime minister and leader of the Nobel Committee, Torbjørn Jagland, who is now charged with aggravated corruption. We've had a couple of very senior diplomats being charged with the same. They all say they are innocent, but the investigations are ongoing. So people are now really starting to question who can we believe, and this is very serious in Norway, which is a society which is highly based on trust. It always has been, and this is really rocking the foundation of a lot of people now.
Let's talk about trust and rocking foundations, but not to do with politicians and high-profile business figures. We're talking about skiers.
Yes, so anyone who watched the Olympics will know that skiing is very important to the Norwegians in particular, and Norwegians seem to be winning everything. I think most have seen by now the amazing Johannes Klæbo running uphill on cross-country skis and creating a meme out of himself. Now, today is the day of the world's largest and oldest ski race called Vasaloppet, and this is in Sweden. Around 15,000 people, professionals and amateurs, have just set off on a 90-kilometer piece. Now, the thing is that you have to do the classic skiing, which is what you saw in these videos of Klæbo from Cortina. You go straight ahead. You're not allowed to do the skating movements side to side, which makes it easier and makes it go faster as well. Now, the organizers of this massive ski run have realized that quite a few people are cheating to do this, because it's after many kilometers, it is very tempting to make things go faster and cheat. So they've increased controls throughout the piece now to try to catch the cheaters, and a lot of people are applauding this, because nobody likes a cheater, and especially not in the sort of the national sport.
Terrible business. Thank you so much for that, Lars Bevanger, bringing us the latest on the news from Norway. We're back with Tira, Shubart and Yossi Mekelberg. Welcome back. Let's find if there's other stuff that you've been wanting to talk about today, because we've obviously, for very obvious reasons, dedicated the first big chunk of today's programme what's happening in the Gulf. Are there any sort of thoughts that you have on this as we move into what is clearly going to be something which is dominating for the next few days and weeks? Tira?
Well, I mean, if we look at what's happened up in Manchester to the Labour Party and the country, the Labour Party lost, and the Greens had a massive win with a really rather remarkable candidate, Hannah Spencer, who is a plumber who campaigns with 4 greyhounds.
Who doesn't? What did you think of what was happening, Yossi? Because if you're outside the United Kingdom, you're looking at one tiny by-election, one little thing that's come, but it actually has it has an enormous ripple effect across the whole of British politics, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we need to mention she just passed also qualification as a plasterer. So, I mean, I don't know how useful it's going to...
How many jobs does this woman want?
I don't know how useful it's going to be in Parliament.
Oh, it could be very useful, because Parliament's falling down, the actual building is. Yes.
That's correct. I think, for listeners outside the UK, there is a kind of a mythical place for by-election in the UK. You might say when you have a majority of 172 in Parliament, who cares about you lose one seat or not? But when you have enough people within your party that start questioning, as the case is Prime Minister Keir Starmer, that maybe you are not the right person, to lead the country, and even worse, to lead us the next election, though they are far away, like 3 years away, then everything like this is used. If this was a safe seat, a very safe seat for Labour, with, I think, 13,000 majority. Losing that, and worse, coming third, also after Green and Reform, this is a really blow for Labour. And the question that many MPs, they always ask themselves, what does it tell about our seats come next election? How it's going to affect, for instance, we're having some municipal election coming up. Is there starting a trend, creating some momentum there that shifts towards other party? But it's also interesting that the two parties that led this election are in many ways sort of anti-establishment, on the left and on the right. And this is kind of a bigger movement in the world that we see the anti-establishment party are the one that win election.
It seems like the United Kingdom has taken a while to catch up with this. Anti-establishment parties have been around have been making their voices felt for the best part of a decade now, and now it seems to be really touching the United Kingdom. Do you think, Tira, that the UK is ready for this shift? It's because we are a two-party system in many ways.
I think that many people will welcome this, other than Labour Party members, but the Greens, who do represent this shift that Yossi is talking about, came second to Labour in 40 constituencies in the last general election. So if they step up their game, and they are talking about issues that are, of course, environmental issues and climate change issues are key to them, but they also have a very strong view on foreign policy and about the events in the Middle East. Harking back to what we've been talking about, and even in India, because the constituency that Hannah Spencer's just won in had a large constituency that came from the subcontinent or have interests in the subcontinent. So the Greens are going to are shaking it up, and we may become much more European in that we have a multi-party establishment and things like coalitions, which we've only had once.
And we tried, and it went to pieces, Tira. I think maybe you might be pitching ahead of the game there a little. What are your thoughts on that one, Yossi? I think it's 2010 when the United Kingdom embarked into a coalition government, and yeah.
With very limited success.
We haven't had one since, put it that way. I mean, I think I was just listening to what Tira says with a slightly cynical frame, just thinking these rose-tinted spectacles about introducing the joys of multi-party politics. What are your thoughts on that one, Yossi?
Well, you're talking to someone that grew up in Israel.
Okay.
which makes the proposition of a multi-party system or coalition, not a system as a coalition, not very attractive, because you see what happens when you have fraction of... You see, the system here, the electoral system here, protects from this by the first past the post. It's very difficult to have it in the multi-party system in the way when you have a low threshold to enter into parliament. But the question, I think, also for Labour and also for Conservative is maybe, they used to be proud of themselves that they are broad church. There is space for everyone. And if you look at the profile of Hannah Spencer, she easily should be within Labour. Some of the more left side, the one more liberal progressive that put climate change as a major concern, consider also a young age with this was concerns many young people about climate change. Why someone like her doesn't have place in Labour?
And do you believe that's because the Labour Party does not appeal to that kind of person, or whether the Labour Party does not wish to appeal to that kind of person?
I think, again, it actually started with electing someone who's anti-established was Jeremy Corbyn, a very unlikely, but whatever I think or not about him, he presented an anti-establishment, and then the loss of election to Boris Johnson, again with a majority then of 80, shifted Labour more to the centre with the belief, which is not far-fetched, that you win election in the centre, but sometimes you try to compete with the other party exactly on their own page, which at the end of the day you can't tell the difference between them, instead of presenting a distinctive alternative. And that's what upset so many voters, especially in the Red Wall, when they're traditional Labour supporters.
But there is now a possibility, if we're looking to the next parliament, when you do have perhaps a lot of Greens and a lot more reform, I think that's inevitable, then you can have a vote again on whether or not you want to move towards a proportional representational system, which you have in Israel, but you also have all across the continent. And if you have PR, then you move into a totally different era of politics, where there has to be more compromises and perhaps more discussions on issues that are absolutely vital to the success of any nation.
The alternative of this is you get, instead of catch-all parties, you get more lobby and pressure groups. So it's the balance between the two, which I agree with you. It's not there.
We're not there yet, and pressure groups are what the Liberal Democrats, who are the third party here in the United Kingdom, will be great when they stop being a pressure group. We've got 4 minutes left. Tira, we need to touch on your space expertise. So off you go. You wanted to tell us about some wonderful planets.
Well, I have some very soothing news here,
wonderful, thank
Yossi, and Emma, because I'm going to tell you something about the skies and I just take you into a slightly different framework. We are looking at the same stars right now that any human being, ever since the beginning of human beings, have been looking at. So there are things that don't change, that are still things of great beauty. And tonight you're going to have an opportunity to have a unique look at this, because there's a thing called the planetary parade, in that all of the planets in the solar system are lining up, except for Mars, who's gone off and where is Mars? Doing something else. And it will happen right after sunset. You'll be able to see, if you look out at the horizon just after sunset, and in the UK that'll be about 6:10, you'll be able to see this little dot, which is Mercury. Now, Mercury is this tiny planet, smaller than the moon, but it's right near the sun. You're going to actually be able to see that. And then to the left of it, you'll then see Venus. And then further up to the left, there'll be Saturn. And above the moon is Jupiter. So these are planets that you're going to be able to see with your naked eye. But if you get a pair of binoculars, everybody has some binoculars around. I don't think you have a telescope, but I bet you have some binoculars. You'll be able to, just near Venus and Mercury, you'll be able to see this little dot of Neptune. You're not going to be able to do that for a long time. And then close to the moon, just underneath the moon, is going to be Uranus. So you have this fantastic planetary parade. It's not going to happen again till 2040. So cross your fingers for some clear skies and go out and forget all the things that we've been talking about and just contemplate the universe, because you're looking at the same things that our species have been looking at for hundreds of thousands of years.
I confess I was out in a place with clear skies last night and was dumbstruck by just how bright the night sky is at the moment. And it does impart that sort of wonderment and joy that basically, Tira, you need us all to carry a little bit more with us as we go about our days. Yes,
look up and it's very calming. And we can move away from some of the adrenaline-fueled moments that we've been living recently.
And we're going to have to find a map of what Tira has just said, or go and listen back to it on a podcast. If you're listening later in the week, sorry, you missed the bus. Are you going to be stargazing tonight, Yossi?
Well, it depends on the weather, but I must say the experience is probably you experience too in Wadi Rum in Jordan, which is a wonderful place for stargazing. And we went there, a delegation there, and took us with 2 astronomers, and they explained us all of this. And I must admit, my knowledge about it is not very good.
We all need a Tira in our lives.
Absolutely, because it's only the idea of doing that. And this was such a wonderful experience in the middle of the desert there in Wadi Rum in Jordan, and getting the explanation exactly as they put here. And just standing there for an hour and a half, it's really, you forget.
It takes you out of yourself, and it lets you ask some of the bigger questions.
Absolutely.
Indeed. And I mean, how important is that for you, Tira? Because this is what you now do for a living. You have reported from all over the world in all manners of situations, and yet you have found yourself looking skyward.
I do look skyward, and also I think also of the experiences of the astronauts that are looking down on us, and they're looking down on this magnificent globe that we are sitting on, and they say over and over again, there's no borders, and it's also a message, I think, of how much more connected we are than disconnected, and I think that's a message that I always feel when I look at the sky.
We'll have to leave it there. The warmest of thanks to all my guests, Tyler Brûlé, Lars Bevanger, Yossi Mekelberg, Inzamam Rashid, and in the studio, Tira Shubart and Yossi Mekelberg. The programme was produced by Mariella Bevan, Desiree Bandley, and our studio engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday returns next week, but until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend. And if you're listening live, look up. Goodbye.